What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected and soft-spoken directors walks into what should have been a routine daytime television interview, only to discover he has stepped into an unexpected on-air confrontation? In this fictional dramatization, Ron Howard, known for his calm demeanor and his mastery behind the camera, suddenly finds himself in the middle of a tense and uncomfortable clash with Joy Behar on The View. What began as a simple promotional appearance for his latest film quickly spirals into a verbal battleground that exposes the messy, unpredictable, and sometimes toxic nature of high-pressure talk show culture. Millions of viewers tuning in for light entertainment instead witness one of the most uncomfortable live moments in recent daytime TV history. Before the chaos unfolded, the morning at ABC Studios seemed perfectly normal. The backstage area hummed with familiar energy, production assistants hurrying from room to room, makeup artists applying last-second touches, and publicists rehearsing talking points with their clients. Ron Howard sat quietly in the green room, reading over the neatly printed notes his publicist had prepared for him. The upcoming interview was supposed to highlight his newest project, a heartwarming drama capturing the quiet resilience of small-town America. Early screenings had already stirred whispers of award-season potential. For Ron, this was nothing new. From his childhood days as Opie Taylor on The Andy Griffith Show to directing acclaimed films such as Apollo 13, A Beautiful Mind, Cinderella Man, and Rush, he had done hundreds of interviews. They were usually predictable, sometimes even enjoyable. The View, in theory, should have been one of the easiest stops on his press tour. "Mr. Howard, we're ready for you," a production assistant called out, her headset slightly askew, clipboard in hand. Ron stood up, smoothing down his tie, a habit left over from decades of being both in front of and behind the camera. He followed her through the familiar maze of hallways decorated with framed photos. There were snapshots of past celebrity guests, iconic episodes, and candid moments between the hosts. The walls practically vibrated with the sound of applause from the live studio audience. As Ron approached the stage, he heard Whoopi Goldberg's voice echo through the speakers, introducing the next segment. The energy was high, the audience enthusiastic, and everything seemed perfectly routine. That illusion shattered the moment he stepped onto the iconic semicircular set. The host smiled warmly as he sat down, but Ron sensed a different kind of tension in the air, something subtle but undeniable. It wasn't the typical nervousness that accompanied live television. This felt more pointed, more deliberate, almost like the faint electricity before a storm. The interview started normally enough. Whoopi asked about the inspiration for the film. Sarah Haynes complimented the cinematography. Sunny Hostin asked about the casting process. Ron answered smoothly, comfortably, as he always did. But then the conversation shifted. Joy Behar leaned forward, her expression sharpened by a mixture of skepticism and something that Ron couldn't quite name. With a tone that seemed oddly confrontational for what was supposed to be a friendly daytime segment, she questioned the film's themes, suggesting that they were nostalgic to the point of being unrealistic. She pressed him about the portrayal of rural America and whether it glossed over deeper societal problems. Her line of questioning wasn't inherently unfair, but the aggression behind it was startling, especially for a platform that typically celebrated its celebrity guests. Ron tried to respond diplomatically, explaining the emotional center of the film and his intention to highlight the human spirit rather than produce a political message. But Joy didn't let up. She interrupted, challenged his explanations, and twisted the conversation toward broader cultural debates that had nothing to do with the movie itself. Her voice grew sharper, the studio lights seemed to burn hotter, and the audience, sensing the unexpected shift, fell into an uneasy silence. What was meant to be a simple promotional interview now felt like a cross-examination. Ron, known for his calm and gentle personality, did his best to stay composed, but even a seasoned professional can struggle when ambushed unexpectedly. Each time he attempted to redirect the discussion back to storytelling, filmmaking, or the emotional core of the project, Joy pulled it back into territory he never intended to discuss. The other hosts shifted uncomfortably, casting glances at each other, trying to subtly intervene without derailing the live segment. Whoopi attempted to smooth things over with humor. Sarah tried to pivot with a lighter question. But the tension had already taken hold. Ron felt his patience beginning to fray. Years of media training taught him to maintain his composure, to stay gracious even under pressure, but this was different. This was no longer a conversation. It felt like a performance of confrontation, a moment engineered for viral clips and online arguments. His normally steady voice wavered. His hands tightened slightly on the edge of the table. For the first time in his long, carefully managed career, Ron Howard felt himself losing footing in front of a live audience. The viewers at home, millions of them, watched with wide eyes. Social media exploded instantly. Clips circulated with captions like "Ron Howard blindsided on The View," and "Why was Joy so aggressive?" Others defended Joy, claiming she was simply asking tough questions. But regardless of interpretation, everyone agreed on one thing. It was one of the most uncomfortable live interviews in recent history. This fictional scenario serves as a reminder of how unpredictable media environments can be, how quickly a simple promotional stop can transform into a stress-filled moment of tension, and how even the most respected figures can be pushed to their limits under the glare of studio lights. The introduction echoed across the studio with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for Hollywood royalty. Our next guest needs no introduction. He's been entertaining us for over 50 years, first as an actor, and now as one of the most successful directors in Hollywood. Please welcome Ron Howard. The audience erupted into applause, clapping, cheering, and even whistling as Ron stepped onto the set. His familiar warm smile, the one that had accompanied him from his days as little Opie Taylor all the way into cinematic history, spread across his face. He waved confidently at the crowd, shook hands with each host, and lowered himself into the guest chair. The studio lights seemed brighter than usual, almost aggressively hot, but Ron forced himself to ignore it. He chalked it up to nerves about promoting a movie he cared deeply about. Even after decades in the spotlight, sharing a personal film with the world always made him just a little anxious. "Ron, thank you so much for being here," Whoopi Goldberg said warmly, leaning on the table with a genuine smile. "I have to say, I've been a fan since the Andy Griffith Show days." Ron chuckled softly. "Thank you, Whoopi. Those were magical times. I feel incredibly fortunate to have grown up in front of America's eyes." His voice carried that gentle, sincere tone. He was famous for the unmistakable Midwestern humility that made him so universally likable. Sarah Haynes leaned forward next, her face glowing with interest. "Your new film deals with themes of community and resilience," she said. "What drew you to this particular story?" Ron's eyes lit up instantly. This was a question he had been waiting for. "You know, Sarah," he began, "in today's divided world, I think we've forgotten how much we actually have in common. This story reminded me of the America I grew up in, a time when neighbors looked out for one another, no matter their background or political beliefs. It's a film about unity, empathy, and rediscovering what binds us." The other hosts nodded thoughtfully. The tone was warm, constructive, steady, exactly what Ron expected from a daytime talk show. And then Joy Behar leaned forward. Her posture changed. Her tone sharpened. Even before she spoke, some instinct inside the studio seemed to shift, like the quiet creak of a door before a storm. "That's interesting, Ron," Joy said, cutting into his answer with a voice edged like a blade. "You talk about the America you grew up in like it was some kind of paradise." She tilted her head, eyebrows lifted. "But wasn't that the same America that was segregated? The same America where women couldn't even open their own bank accounts? Where anyone who wasn't straight, white, and Christian was treated like a second-class citizen?" The temperature in the studio seemed to plummet. Even the cameras felt like they hesitated. Ron blinked, genuinely caught off guard. He opened his mouth, paused, and then tried to compose himself. "Well, Joy," he said carefully, "I certainly don't want to romanticize the past. Every era has its challenges, and we've made tremendous progress as a society." Joy didn't even wait for him to finish. "Progress that people like you fought against every step of the way." She snapped. "Let's be honest about what you're really saying here. When you talk about the good old days, you're talking about a time when people like you had all the power, and everyone else was expected to know their place." The audience murmured uneasily. Some glanced toward the stage doors, as if expecting producers to intervene. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure whether they were watching a daytime interview or an unexpected ideological ambush. For a moment Ron had no words. It wasn't that he was incapable of defending himself. He had been navigating Hollywood politics his entire life, but the sheer suddenness of Joy's accusation left him stunned. He had come prepared to discuss cinematography, casting, emotional storytelling, not a public interrogation of America's social history. Ron took a breath. Joy, with respect, that's not what I meant at all. My intention, your intention. Joy cut in again, her voice rising. Intent doesn't erase impact. When influential people like you spread these rose-colored stories about the past, you're reinforcing a narrative that hurts real people. You're pretending everything used to be so wonderful, when the truth is, it was only wonderful for a select few. The studio fell silent. Whoopi shifted in her seat, visibly uncomfortable. Sarah's smile faded into tight concern. Sunny Hostin looked like she wanted to jump in, but wasn't sure whether it would help or pour gasoline on a growing fire. Ron's publicist, standing just off stage, looked as if she was about to faint. She clutched her clipboard with white knuckles, whispering something frantically to a nearby staff member. From the outside, she appeared to be holding her composure, but every inch of her body language screamed that this interview had veered wildly off course. Back in the chair, Ron finally found his voice, though it carried a tremor that hadn't been there before. Joy, the film is about empathy, he said quietly. It's not about politics. It's not about erasing the past or ignoring the struggles people faced. It's about rediscovering kindness, something I think we can all agree we need more of, but the damage had been done. The warmth of the original conversation was gone, replaced by a thick, crackling tension that everyone could feel. Viewers at home leaned forward, sensing the shift in energy. Some grabbed their phones, ready to clip the moment. Others held their breath, unsure of whether Ron would hold on to his composure, or whether this would become one of those infamous talk show moments replayed endlessly across social media. What was supposed to be a light-hearted conversation about filmmaking had transformed into a full-scale ideological confrontation, one Ron Howard never saw coming, and behind the scenes, his publicist silently mouthed the words every Hollywood representative fears. This is a disaster. They're human messages, human messages. Joy repeated the words slowly, each one dripping with disdain, as if she were tasting something bitter. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms as the audience watched with growing discomfort. That's code for not wanting to rock the boat, Ron. That's the luxury of privilege. You get to make movies about how wonderful humanity can be, while real people out there are fighting for their basic rights every single day. A thick silence smothered the studio. You could practically hear the hum of the overhead lights. Whatever warmth remained from the cheerful introduction had long evaporated. Now the air felt brittle, like one wrong word could shatter the entire room. Ron's fingers curled slightly around the arms of his chair. It wasn't obvious, but for a man as composed and gentle as Ron Howard, even that small movement was a warning sign. His patience, legendary in Hollywood circles, was beginning to fray. His jaw tightened. His usually soft, measured breathing had grown shallower. Every host at the table saw the shift, though no one dared to interrupt. Ron straightened his posture, his expression sharpening in a way the audience had rarely seen from him. Gone was the warm, easygoing smile that had greeted the crowd minutes earlier. In its place stood a man who had been pushed unexpectedly into a corner. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a firmness that made even the cameras seem to lean in. Joy, he began, carefully controlling every syllable, I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here, but you seem determined to paint me as some kind of villain for making films that bring people together. The words were calm, but the steel underneath them was unmistakable. That's not privilege talking, he continued. That's experience. That's decades of seeing how storytelling can heal, can unite, can spark hope in people who desperately need it. For the briefest moment, the room held its breath. Perhaps Ron's steady, grounded tone would simmer the confrontation back down. Perhaps the conversation could be rescued, but Joy's eyes lit up. It was instantaneous, a spark of triumph, or perhaps anticipation. Like a predator who had finally drawn a reaction from its prey, she leaned forward, her voice dropping just enough to add drama, but rising enough for the microphones to catch every syllable. Experience. She repeated, stretching the word out as if it were some kind of exotic specimen she was dissecting. Experience telling feel, good stories from the safety of a director's chair, experience living a life where you never had to question your rights, your safety, your place in the world. Sarah Haynes shot a quick glance at Whoopi, pleading, confused, silently asking if someone should intervene. Whoopi's expression tightened. She clearly wasn't comfortable, but she also knew millions of people were watching, and stepping in too soon might only escalate things further. Ron inhaled slowly. The disappointment on his face was apparent, not just in Joy's attack, but in the entire situation spiraling into something he had never intended. He had come to promote a film about unity. Instead, he was standing in the middle of a televised cultural battlefield. Joy. He said more quietly now, "My films celebrate resilience, compassion, and the humanity we all share. That's not ignoring anyone's struggle. That's acknowledging that even in dark times, people have the capacity for extraordinary kindness. That message shouldn't be controversial." Joy lifted an eyebrow. Unless that message conveniently ignores who suffers in those dark times. Ron felt a sting, not because she had argued him, but because she wasn't actually listening. She wasn't debating the film anymore. She was debating him, his identity, his entire life, his intentions, his values. He pressed his lips together, choosing his words with precision. "Kindness doesn't ignore suffering," he said. "It responds to it." A faint gasp rippled through the crowd. Not because the line was confrontational, but because it was the closest Ron had come to a verbal jab. But Joy wasn't backing off, not even a little. She leaned even closer, her tone now deceptively calm, the calm that often precedes an explosion. "Is that what you tell yourself?" she asked. "That you're helping the world by making it look prettier on screen? Cute, but real progress doesn't come from comforting stories, Ron. It comes from uncomfortable truths. Truths you seem very afraid to talk about." Ron's eyes narrowed slightly, still polite, still measured, but steely now. "I'm not afraid of truth," he said. "I'm afraid of conversations that start with assumptions instead of understanding." This time, the audience reacted audibly. A mix of gasps, murmurs, and a few scattered claps echoed through the studio. Even Sunny Hostin raised her eyebrows, impressed by Ron's composure under pressure, but Joy only smiled, a slow, knowing smile. She had drawn blood, and she knew it. "Interesting," she said, tapping her pen on the table, "because everything you've said today makes it seem like you're very comfortable with a version of America that was only kind to people like you." Ron didn't flinch, but the muscles in his jaw did tighten again, ever so slightly. "Joy," he said with quiet intensity, "you're twisting my words, and frankly, you're not giving me the benefit of the doubt. I came here to talk about a film that lifts people up. You're turning it into a trial." Joy shrugged. "Maybe it's time someone put people like you on trial." The audience gasped again, louder this time. Whoopi finally stepped in, voice steady but with a sharp edge. "Okay, Joy, let's take a breath here." But the damage had been done. The tension in the room had reached a breaking point. Ron sat stiffly in his chair, the weight of the moment pressing on him. Joy watched him closely, waiting, almost hungry, for whatever came next. And millions of viewers at home leaned closer to their screens, sensing that they were witnessing a moment neither Ron nor the show would forget any time soon. Ron cleared his throat gently, trying his best to maintain the steady composure that had carried him through decades of interviews, press tours, and on-camera appearances. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice calm but edged with the slightest hint of confusion. He leaned forward, hands clasped loosely, wanting to diffuse the tension rather than escalate it. "I was simply talking about community spirit, about the way neighbors used to look out for one another, how people felt connected in an everyday, human sense. That doesn't have anything to do with politics or social hierarchies. It's just something I've always valued." But before he could continue, Joy leaned back in her chair with a slow, deliberate motion, her expression shifting into a satisfied smirk, the kind that suggested she believed she had caught him in some grand contradiction. "Everything is political, Ron," she declared, her tone slicing through the studio air like a blade. "Especially when someone with your platform starts waxing nostalgic about the past. You can't separate art from politics, and you definitely can't separate nostalgia from the reality of who was suffering while you were enjoying your perfect childhood. The audience shifted uneasily, sensing that the mood on set was rapidly tilting out of balance. Sunny Hostin attempted to step in, raising a hand slightly as if physically trying to soften the moment. "Joy, I think Ron is just trying to talk about his film," she said, offering a polite smile toward their guest as if hoping to shield him from the intensity radiating from Joy's side of the table. But Joy wasn't having it. She snapped her focus back to Ron, cutting Sunny off. "No, let him answer." Her voice sharpened, her attention now fixed on Ron with almost predatory precision. "I want to know if Ron Howard thinks the civil rights movement was just people complaining about the good old days he's so fond of remembering." A ripple of discomfort passed through the other hosts. Even Whoopi, herself no stranger to blunt commentary, raised her eyebrows at the escalation. The studio seemed to grow smaller, hotter. The cameras hummed. The audience held its breath. Ron's jaw tightened, but only slightly, a controlled reaction honed from years in the public eye. He inhaled slowly, grounding himself. This wasn't the first time he'd faced a tough question, but this particular line of interrogation felt different. More personal, more accusatory. The question wasn't just unfair. It was constructed to corner him no matter how he responded. "Joy," he began carefully, with all due respect, "you're putting words in my mouth that I never said. I've always supported civil rights, women's rights, and equality for all people. These things matter deeply to me, not just professionally, but personally. My films have consistently promoted themes of inclusion, empathy, and understanding." Joy's lips curled again, a spark of satisfaction lighting her eyes. She leaned forward this time, elbows on the table. "Have they, though?" she pressed. "Or have they just been comfortable feel? Good stories for white audiences, movies that let people walk out of theaters patting themselves on the back without ever being challenged, without confronting anything real." The other hosts exchanged glances, silently communicating their own discomfort. It was rare to see a guest, especially one as widely respected and warmly regarded as Ron Howard, being pushed this forcefully, almost aggressively. Even the producer behind the cameras seemed uncertain whether to intervene, watching with narrowed eyes as the tension continued to climb. Ron straightened slightly, regaining his footing. He understood now that this wasn't just an interview gone mildly off track. This was a deliberate confrontation. That realization sharpened his focus. When he spoke again, his voice remained steady, but there was a quiet firmness beneath it. "I think," he said, "that if you look honestly at my body of work, from A Beautiful Mind to 13 Lives, what you'll see are stories that celebrate human resilience, compassion, and the incredible things people can accomplish when they work together. Those themes aren't partisan. They're not tied to one political ideology or another. They're universal." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle before continuing. "The message isn't that the past was perfect. It's that people, regardless of their background, can rise above adversity. My films aim to highlight what's possible when we choose cooperation over division. That isn't political spin, that's humanity." For a moment the set fell quiet. Even Joy hesitated, as if momentarily thrown off by the calm clarity of his response. Sunny looked relieved. Sarah offered Ron a small, encouraging smile. Whoopi nodded once, acknowledging the measured strength of his answer. But the quiet lasted only a moment. Joy tapped her pen against the table, her gaze flickering with lingering challenge. Yet even she seemed to recognize that the conversation, at least for now, had reached its emotional peak. Ron's steady demeanor, his refusal to be rattled, had shifted the energy just enough to keep the exchange from spiraling further. The audience exhaled collectively. The tension, while still present, had softened into a heavy but manageable weight. Ron sat back, folding his hands again, a subtle sign that he had said what he needed to say. The interview would go on, of course. Questions would return to films, inspiration, directing, the creative process. But the moment, the intense, uncomfortable, emotionally charged clash would linger in the air long after the cameras turned off, becoming one of those segments viewers would replay, analyze, and debate for days to come.